February 23rd, 1983. The Shrine Auditorium, Los Angeles. Marvin Gaye sat in a backstage dressing room, staring at his reflection in a mirror bordered by bright white bulbs. His face looked unfamiliar to him, thinner than it should be, older than his 43 years. The cocaine had hollowed out his cheeks, and the insomnia had carved dark shadows under his eyes. In 2 hours, he would walk onto that stage and accept 2 Grammy Awards for Sexual Healing, the biggest hit of his career, the comeback everyone had been waiting for. But Marvin wasn't thinking about the awards. He was thinking about how to get through the night without falling apart in front of the cameras. He had arrived late to the ceremony, deliberately. The longer he waited, the less time he would have to interact with people. The less time he would have to pretend that everything was fine, that the success of Sexual Healing had fixed the things that were broken inside him. His manager had called 3 times that afternoon, asking where he was, reminding him that he was nominated, that he needed to be there. Marvin had ignored the first 2 calls. On the third, he had answered and said only, "I'll be there." Then he had hung up and stared at the phone for 20 minutes, wondering if he should just stay home. But he went. Because that's what you do when you're Marvin Gaye. You show up. You perform. You give people what they expect, even when what you need is to disappear. The dressing room was small and sterile. A couch, a mirror, a table with bottled water, and a fruit basket that nobody would touch. Marvin had requested to be alone. No stylist, no assistant, no one fussing over his appearance or trying to pump him up before the cameras. Just silence. Just him and the voice in his head that never stopped whispering that none of this mattered, that success was just another kind of prison, that the higher you climbed, the farther you had to fall. He had won Grammys before. In 1971, he had been nominated for What's Going On, though he hadn't won in the major categories. The industry had praised the album as revolutionary, but the awards had gone to other artists, safer choices. Marvin had told himself he didn't care. Awards were just politics, just the music industry congratulating itself. But tonight was different. Tonight they were going to call his name. They were going to put him on that stage and celebrate his resurrection. The man who had fled to Europe, who had been broken, who had recorded Sexual Healing in a Belgian studio while drowning in paranoia and cocaine, was now being welcomed back as a conquering hero. It felt like a lie. Marvin stood up and walked to the small window in the dressing room. Outside, Los Angeles stretched out in every direction, a sprawling grid of lights and lives, millions of people moving through their nights, unaware that Marvin Gaye was standing in a backstage room, feeling like a ghost. He pressed his palm against the glass. It was cold. Everything felt cold lately, even when the sun was shining, even when people were smiling and congratulating him. There was a distance between him and the world, a barrier he couldn't cross no matter how hard he tried. Someone knocked on the door. "Mr. Gaye, 5 minutes to your category." Marvin didn't respond. He stood there, hand on the glass, until the footsteps faded away. He thought about Sexual Healing and what it had cost him to create it. People heard a seductive, sensual song about intimacy and connection. They heard a smooth groove, a perfect blend of soul and electronic production, a track that felt modern and timeless at the same time. But they didn't hear what Marvin heard when he listened to it. He heard desperation. He heard a man so disconnected from himself that he was singing about healing as if it were something that happened to other people, as if he were observing it from the outside rather than experiencing it himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sexual Healing was about finding redemption through physical intimacy, about the power of touch and connection to save a broken soul. But Marvin, while recording it, had been more isolated than ever. Living in Ostend, Belgium, in a small apartment overlooking the North Sea, paranoid that the FBI was tracking him, convinced that everyone around him was either trying to use him or destroy him. The studio sessions had been marked by midnight walks into the ocean, by engineers finding him waist-deep in freezing water, by long stretches of silence where Marvin would sit and stare at nothing, unable to articulate what he was feeling, but knowing it was something close to drowning. And now that song, born out of that darkness, was being celebrated as a triumph. People danced to it. They made love to it. They heard joy in it. and Marvin felt like a fraud. Another knock. "Mr. Gaye, they're announcing your category now." This time, Marvin moved. He straightened his jacket, checked his appearance one last time in the mirror, and walked to the door. His hand hesitated on the handle for just a moment. He could still leave. He could walk out the back exit, get in a car, and drive away. No one could stop him. But where would he go? What would that solve? He opened the door and followed the production assistant down a narrow hallway, past other dressing rooms where other artists were preparing for their moments, past crew members adjusting lights and checking cables, past all the machinery that made these televised celebrations possible. The noise grew louder as they approached the stage area. Music, applause, the hum of anticipation. Marvin was led to a designated seat in the audience, close to the stage. People turned to look at him as he sat down. Smiles, nods, a few waves. He returned them mechanically, his face arranged into an expression that approximated warmth. But inside, he felt nothing. Just the familiar numbness that had become his default state. The emotional flatness that cocaine and exhaustion had carved into him. The category was announced. Best Male R&B Vocal Performance. The nominees were read off, and when Marvin's name was mentioned, the camera cut to him. He smiled. He had practiced that smile. It looked genuine on screen. No one watching at home would know that behind it, Marvin was counting the seconds until this was over. And the Grammy goes to Marvin Gaye, Sexual Healing. Applause erupted. People stood. Marvin rose from his seat and made his way to the stage, shaking hands as he passed, nodding his thanks. His legs felt disconnected from his body, moving automatically while his mind remained somewhere else, watching from a distance. On stage, under the lights, Marvin accepted the Grammy from the presenter. The weight of the trophy in his hands felt strange. He had imagined this moment would mean something, that holding this physical symbol of recognition would fill the emptiness inside him. But it didn't. It was just a piece of metal shaped like a gramophone. He stepped to the microphone. The audience waited for his speech. "Thank you," Marvin said. His voice was steady, controlled. "This means a lot. Thank you to everyone who believed in this song, who helped bring it to life. Thank you to the Academy." He paused. There were other things he could say. He could thank specific people, tell a story about the recording process, make a joke. But he didn't have the energy for performance. He had used it all up just getting to this moment. "Thank you," he said again, and walked off stage. Backstage, the production assistant tried to guide him to the press room, where winners were expected to pose for photos and answer questions. Marvin ignored the direction and kept walking. He found his dressing room, closed the door, and set the Grammy down on the table next to the untouched fruit basket. He sat on the couch and stared at the award. It stared back, golden and silent. 20 minutes later, his name was called again. Best R&B Instrumental Performance, also for Sexual Healing. Another walk to the stage, another acceptance, another brief speech that said nothing of substance. 2 Grammys in one night, a triumph by any measure. Proof that Marvin Gaye was back, that he still mattered, that his music could still move people. But when Marvin returned backstage the second time, carrying both awards, he felt nothing except exhaustion. The after parties would be starting soon. His manager had mentioned something about celebrations, about people who wanted to see him, to congratulate him. Marvin had nodded but made no commitments. He knew he wouldn't go. He couldn't face rooms full of people pretending to be happy for him, pretending to understand what this meant, when he didn't understand it himself. He changed out of his formal clothes and into something more comfortable. Jeans, a simple shirt. He gathered the 2 Grammys and walked out of the Shrine Auditorium through a side exit, avoiding the crowds. His driver was waiting. "Where to, Mr. Gaye?" Marvin gave the address of his hotel. Not his parents' house on Gramercy Place, where he had been staying. Not a party or a celebration. Just a quiet hotel room where he could be alone. The drive was silent. Marvin looked out the window at Los Angeles passing by, the same city he had grown up in, the same streets he had walked when he first signed with Motown decades ago. Everything looked the same and completely different at the same time. Or maybe it was him who had changed so much that he could no longer recognize the world he used to know. At the hotel, he took the elevator to his room on the 8th floor. Inside, he set the two Grammys on the desk by the window and stood there looking at them. Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, Best R&B Instrumental Performance, two acknowledgments of excellence. Two pieces of evidence that Marvin Gaye still had value in the eyes of the music industry. But value to whom? And for what purpose? Marvin walked to the minibar and poured himself a drink. Vodka, straight. He didn't taste it, just felt the burn. Then he poured another. He thought about calling someone. His mother, maybe. She would be happy about the Grammys. She would tell him how proud she was, how she always knew he would succeed. But Marvin didn't want to hear that. Pride felt like pressure, like another expectation he had to fulfill. He thought about calling one of his children, but what would he say? I won some awards tonight, but I still feel empty? That wasn't a conversation you had with your kids. So he sat alone in the hotel room, drinking vodka and staring at the Grammys until they blurred into shapeless golden objects. Hours passed. The city outside grew quieter. Marvin moved from the desk to the window, pressing his forehead against the glass the same way he had in the dressing room. 8 floors below, the streets were nearly empty. A few cars, a few late-night wanderers. Everyone had somewhere to be, somewhere to go. Marvin felt like he was floating above it all, untethered, watching life happen to other people. He thought about sexual healing again, about the lyrics he had written. When I get that feeling, I need sexual healing. It was supposed to be about desire, about the physical act of connection providing a kind of salvation. But what Marvin needed couldn't be found in another person's arms. What he needed was a way out of his own mind, a way to silence the voice that told him he was worthless, that his success was meaningless, that everything he had built was just a facade covering a hollow core. The cocaine would quiet that voice for a while. He knew there was some in his bag, carefully hidden, always available. It would give him a few hours of relief, a few hours where the emptiness didn't feel so overwhelming. But he also knew what came after. The paranoia, the sleeplessness, the crash that left him feeling even worse than before. It was a cycle he couldn't break, even though he understood it perfectly. Marvin went to his bag and found what he was looking for. He didn't think about it. Thinking made it harder. He just acted mechanically, the way he had walked to the stage and accepted the awards, the way he had smiled for the cameras and said thank you without meaning it. The high came quickly, washing over him in a wave of artificial warmth. For a brief moment, the emptiness receded. He felt something close to comfort, something approximating peace. But even in that moment, he knew it was temporary. He knew that in a few hours, he would be right back where he started, alone in a hotel room, staring at golden trophies that meant nothing. As the night stretched on and became early morning, Marvin lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The Grammys sat on the desk, catching the faint light from the city outside. Symbols of achievement, evidence of talent recognized and celebrated. But to Marvin, they were just objects. Heavy, expensive objects that would eventually end up on a shelf somewhere. Gathering dust, reminders of a night when the world told him he mattered and he couldn't feel it. He thought about what came next. There would be interviews, promotional appearances, pressure to capitalize on the success of sexual healing and release another album. Motown would want more product. His ex-wives would want more money. The IRS would want their share. Everyone wanted something from Marvin Gaye, and he had nothing left to give. He had been running on empty for years now, performing out of obligation and financial necessity rather than passion or joy. The music that had once been his salvation had become just another form of labor, another burden to carry. And tonight's awards, which should have validated all that effort, had only confirmed what he already knew. Success didn't heal anything. Recognition didn't fill the void. You could win every award, sell every record, have every person in the world tell you that you were talented and important, and still feel completely alone. Marvin closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. It never did anymore, without chemical assistance. His mind raced, cycling through memories and regrets, through moments of triumph that had felt hollow even when they were happening. He thought about Tammy Terrell, who had died 13 years ago, and how her death had broken something in him that never healed. He thought about his father, waiting back at the house on Gramercy Place, the man who had beaten him throughout his childhood and now lived off the money Marvin earned. He thought about his failed marriages, his estranged children, the lawsuits and the debts and the endless demands. And he thought about how tired he was, not just physically, though the exhaustion was real and constant, but a deeper kind of tired, a weariness of spirit that no amount of rest could cure. He was tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of being Marvin Gaye, the icon, the legend, the voice of a generation. He wanted to just be Marvin, whoever that was underneath all the layers of expectation and image. But he had been playing the role for so long that he wasn't sure there was anything underneath anymore. The sun began to rise, pale light creeping through the hotel room window. Marvin watched it happen, still lying on the bed, still wearing the clothes he had put on after changing out of his Grammy night outfit. Another day was beginning, another day of existing in a world that celebrated him while he quietly fell apart. He looked at the Grammys one more time. Best Male R&B Vocal Performance. Best R&B Instrumental Performance. February 23, 1983. The night Marvin Gaye proved he was still relevant, still talented, still capable of creating music that moved millions. And the night he realized, with absolute certainty, that none of it would save him.